The fog came in like uncombed wool, snagging on the low skerries off Hanko and muffling the clank of the buoy tender that first saw her. A two-masted schooner drifted there under a slack triangle of canvas, hull black as a church shoe and bow, nudging the tide with the patience of a sleepwalker. The mate raised his binoculars and swore because there are shapes at sea that mean work, and then there are shapes that mean stories. This one meant both. They read her name as the mist thinned. Adolf Hertzk, letters clean on the sternboard, home port painted in a hand that looked Finnish in its tidy sternness. No signal flags, no answering wave, no sound except the soft tap of a loose fender against plank. The buoy tender kept a cautious distance while the crew argued old sailors' superstitions in low voices. In the end, duty and curiosity tied the same knot. Two men went across in a skiff with a coil of line and the careful boldness you take to a sleeping dog. They called out once, twice, then climbed the rail. The deck smelled of tar and wet hemp. Coils lay where they should have, ladders were catted and lashed. A bosun's knife sat open on a coil as if its owner had only set it down to blink. The wheel was unattended, lashed half-heartedly to leeward, as if someone had promised to be right back. In the companionway, the air turned warmer and close, the way old ships hold breath. The men stepped down and found the mess table laid. Bowls, a loaf wrapped in a towel, a pot of stew with the skin not yet puckered hard, cups set mouth down to keep the dust out. A kettle rested on the iron stove, the top of it still warm to the hand. No crew. In the master's cabin, an oil lamp burned low, wick curled, its flame no taller than a fingernail. The logbook lay open, pencil across the page. A heading read neat and square, barometer steady, wind west-southwest, visibility poor, and then a half-sentence ran out mid-stroke. Heard. The next page was blank as slate. In the forecastle bunks were made with the kind of shipboard precision that turns a narrow mattress into a soldier's bed. A book of hymns lay face down on a chest, a pair of work boots tucked beneath like a well-trained dog. The men climbed back into gray daylight and shouted to bring more hands. On a second pass, they tried the holds, found the cargo as listed in papers tucked in a tin, timber bound for a North Sea port, crates of machine spares, nothing that sparkled or invited knives. It should have been a salvage man's dream, a sound hull, valuable cargo, and no one aboard to contest a claim. Instead, it felt like walking into a room where someone has just stopped speaking. They towed her to shelter, a cautious parade through chopped water, then handed her over to the coastal guard, who came with stiff hats, notebooks, and the relief that comes from having something to explain. The year was 1932, and Finland's coast service was still young, proud of its new cutters and its file folders with crisp, stapled corners. They photographed the laid table, the lamp, the log with its mouth half open. They took fingerprints from the cabin doors and shoe prints from sticky tar where the sun had warmed a seam. They measured the scuff on the binnacle brass, the frayed end of a manila line, the bite on a biscuit, as if teeth could testify. Newspapers reached for the easy comparison and wrote another North Sea riddle, even though the water was Baltic cold and the skerries had Finnish names. The headline fit because people already knew how to read it. A tidy ship, a missing crew, a table set for those who would never come back. Dockside talk turned into theories before the ink dried. Some said Adolf Hertzk had taken a wave that snapped a man from the rail and that the rest had gone in after, line by line, the way loyalty can be a chain. Others said gas from the stove had scared them into the open air, that a spark had chased them out with the smell of death, and they had tumbled into fog. Old-timers added darker flavors, a boarding in the night by men who knew exactly what not to take, a quarrel that climbed too fast, a fever that ran through the crew until discipline could no longer stand. The Coast Guardsmen preferred diagrams to legends. They drew lines from last departure to last sighting and watched their pencil tip press into mystery. A fishing craft out of Ekenes reported a schooner gliding weirdly close under low canvas. A lighthouse keeper thought he saw a light the night before that burned too early and died too soon. A customs man swore he recognized the master's handwriting from a cargo declaration last year, a tight script that left flourishes to the vein, and said it looked steady in the log until that last broken word. The guardsmen sniffed the stovepipe, set the kettle back where they found it, and measured the fuel in the tank. They lifted the lid on the stew and muttered about how quickly the sea cools a man's dinner once the lid is off. They found the dory still slung at the davits, oars nested. That made everything worse. Fear is a scramble. Abandonment has a routine. This looked like neither. Families came down from Helsinki and Turku to stand on the pier with faces set in that particular traveling grief. Wives stared past officials into the ship's mouth, searching for some ordinary mistake that would turn all this back into annoyance. Parents asked to see the logbook and traced the last lines with forefingers, as if feeling the pencil's speed would tell them the ending. A child pressed her palm to the hull and whispered her father's name once, quietly, then said nothing else to adults for 2 days. A pastor prayed in a voice that refused melodrama and asked only that the sea yield what it had taken. The sea did not answer. A storm moved through and delayed everything with rain that washed chalk from the quay and clarity from minds that had come to believe they could deduce anything if given enough objects. The Adolf Hertzk strained against her moorings at night like a patient annoyed at his bed. The watchman swore he heard footfalls on her deck when the gusts hit. In the morning there were only gulls and a patch of dried rain where the companionway hatch had been left a crack open. Someone closed it and made a note. When the weather cleared, they took her out again with a skeleton crew to retrace her wake, an exercise in humility that proved only this: she was comfortable in bad visibility, her timbers tight, her balance good. They sounded where she might have bumped and found no bruises. They dragged shallows where a boat might have overturned and brought up only weed and a single silver spoon. Divers in thick suits went down off a rock where local rumor said wrecks go to die and came up with nothing but the important knowledge that nothing lay there. The empty, in a ledger, is a line, too. Weeks turned long. The stew pot got scrubbed and put away. The photographs went into folders. Someone took the lamp, cleaned it, and returned it to the master's table, where it looked both more and less like evidence. In time, the Coast Guardsmen signed a paper that meant the ship was officially no longer a puzzle for them. The insurance men took their measurements with the cold affection that number keepers bring to good wood. A buyer came forward who did not mind that his new vessel had been a headline. He changed little more than her route. The name stayed. Years made a story out of what the first days had called an incident. Sailors switching watches in the Skagerrak told it as a caution against leaving gas unchecked and against trusting a calm patch of fog. A tugman in Rotterdam swore that he once saw Adolf Hertzk in a dawn reach with nobody at her wheel, then blushed when reminded that ships can steer themselves when balanced and that ghosts rarely file customs papers. A woman who had stood on the quay that first week kept a clipping under her sewing basket and took it out every winter to iron it flat with her palm. She moved inland before the war and learned to miss the sound of halyards singing against a mast in a frost wind. The unfinished log took on a life beyond its paper. Heard became a prompt that invited invention. Heard what? A call from the fog, a crack in the hull, a hymn from nowhere, the first drum of ice, a whisper that said, "Stop the stove now," a gull speaking a man's name with a human throat. The lack of a direct object was its own theology. At sea, you are always hearing something and deciding whether to honor it. The last pencil stroke trailed off like a line thrown just short. If you ask officials about the case now, those who keep the old binders, those who walk museum halls where name boards hang like portraits, they will shrug the honest shrug reserved for work well done that yielded no answer. They will show you photographs that prove a pot can hold warmth without promising a return. They will point to the page where the log stops and tell you that sometimes the next page is all water. If you ask the sea, it will give you wind and say nothing else. What remains is a ledger not of balances, but of absences, a ship that brought itself within reach, a table that fed no one, a lamp that burned through its own small store of patience, a word that began and decided not to finish. The Adolf Hertzk sailed on new errands under new skies, and perhaps that is right. Not every mystery asks to be solved. Some ask only to be carried, as sailors carry their dead in stories, not to haunt them, but to remind them that attention is a form of prayer. Thank you for listening to The Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.